Ovaries. So the ovaries are, of course, the female gonads. They are homologous to the testes in a male. They develop differently, of course, about 6 weeks implantation. After implantation, they'll actually start, or 6 weeks after fertilization, they'll start going down one path or the other. And then, similar to the male gonads, they have double functionality. They produce gametes. In a female, those are called ova or oocytes. And then they also produce hormones. And the hormones that they produce are primarily estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so let's figure out where they are in reference to other things. So this is a posterior view. So you're looking at the backside. So if, for instance, you were going to be the oviduct, your ovaries would be kind of behind you right here. And then here it is in an actual cadaver. Here's the ovaries. They're strange looking little critters. They look like little lumps of like cottage cheese. Here's the uterus. Here's the ovaries. They're behind there. Let's show you a mid-sagittal section too, just to give you some orientation to that. Where are you, mid-sagittal section? Come here, you little bugger. Okay, so in a mid-sagittal section again, so here's the uterus. Fallopian tubes kind of go back, right? And then there's the ovaries right there. They're smaller than you would expect them to be, or at least smaller than I expected them to be. They are homologous to the testes. One of the important things that ends up having some clinical significance is that the uterine tubes or oviducts or fallopian tubes or whatever the heck you want to call them don't actually completely seal over the ovaries. They come into contact, but it's not like a seal. So what happens is when you ovulate, you actually ovulate into the peritoneal cavity, and generally what the oviducts have to do is they actually have to sort of, it's called courting the oocyte. So there's smooth muscle in the wall of the oviduct, and then remember there's ciliated cells, and so they create a wave to attract the oocyte into the oviduct. Doesn't always make it in there, which is how you can get some pregnancies that happen outside of the reproductive tract. Okay, let's talk about blood supply to the ovaries. There is an ovarian branch, and what arteries do you think? Ovarian branch from which iliac arteries? I'll let you look it up. And then there's also another ovarian branch from the, so the ovarian branch, ovarian arteries branch to form. And then the ovarian branch of the uterine arteries. The nerve supply to the ovaries, they have motor innervation from the autonomic nervous system. They also have visceral sensory innervation, meaning that some women can actually feel it when they ovulate, and I'll show you how ovulation occurs in just a second. So, by the way, the ovarian arteries here, those are the gonadals. So they actually branch from the abdominal aorta, right, directly off the abdominal aorta. Remember, if you know the sex, then they're not called gonadals. If you know the sex and it's female, they're ovarians. And if you know the sex and it's male, they are testicular arteries. And then there's another branch, the ovarian branch, from the internal iliac arteries. Okay. And now let's talk about the tissue layers of the ovaries. I'm not going to hold you responsible for a ton of detail about this, but we do have to sort of meet it. So this is an ovary, okay? And I want you to see a few things because you're going to run into a lot of the same things in a testis. So around the very outermost portion, the outer portion of the ovaries is this portion that you call the germinal epithelium. It is simple cuboidal epithelium, and it's on the outside of the ovary. Okay, keep that in mind because that will matter in just a minute. That's where ovarian cancer usually occurs. And then just deep to that, can you see it kind of in this pinkish color, just deep to that? That's called the tunica albuginea. Tunic means coat. Don't know what albuginea means. I'll have to look it up. This is a connective tissue capsule on the outside. The testes have the same tunica albuginea, only it's thicker in the testes. The testes are external. They need a little bit more protection. And then you get into the action part of the ovary. And the action part of the ovary is actually in the cortex. The ovarian cortex around the outside is really where all of the meiosis and development and ovulation is going to occur. The ovarian medulla on the inside is primarily where the blood vessels and things come and go from. So the ovarian medulla is just loose connective tissue with lots and lots of blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic vessels, and they enter on the hilus or hilum. Okay, so let's talk about the cortex a bit more. So I want you to kind of picture what's going on here. So remember learning about meiosis in 1610 and whatever other biology class you had before. The process of meiosis for sexually reproducing organisms is so that you can take a cell with X number of chromosomes and divide that cell, that chromosome number in half, so that when you sexually reproduce with another organism, you end up with the right number of chromosomes. So adult human cells have 46 chromosomes if they are typical, normal, healthy, reproducing cells. But in order to make another human, what I'm going to have to do is during the process of before ovulation, I'm going to have to reduce my chromosome number by half to 23, so that when a sperm meets that ovum or oocyte, it will fertilize it and you'll get 46 chromosomes again. So here's the deal. What happens, these little guys right here, these follicles, is like a cell that's surrounded by follicle cells, and it's going to support like the developing oocyte. And these begin as what we call primordial follicles. Don't worry too much about that term. It's not the important part. These are diploid, meaning they have 46 chromosomes in humans. And here's the important part on how it's related to things that you've heard before. What is true in women is that you are born with all of these you are ever going to have. You are not born with all of the eggs you're ever going to have, but you're born with all of the egg-producing structures you're ever going to have. And that's these follicles, okay? And those will age with you, okay? So you're born with about 1.5 to 2 million primordial follicles. And even in Utah, ain't nobody want to have 1.5 or 2 million kids. In a typical adult female reproductive span, you will ovulate about 400 of these. The rest of them are just going to degenerate. But the important part is that these were here from fetal development and they age with you. And this, of course, has implications for advanced maternal age in women because these will age with you. Now, the difference, before we get into male reproductive system a little later, the difference between males and females here is when you're talking about males, just stick with me. When you're talking about males, they are born with follicles. They're obviously not going to make oocytes, right? They're going to make sperm. They're born with follicles, but some of those follicles go through meiosis to make sperm every month, but they also go through mitosis every month. So they're making new ones and then using some of them for spermatogenesis. With females, we don't make any new ones. They age with us. Okay, so what happens to the ones that you don't use if you only ovulate around 400 oocytes per reproductive years, per whole reproductive cycle? They just degenerate and they're reabsorbed. It's called follicular atresia. So as they go through this process, they are reducing the chromosome number, but the thing is actually getting bigger because it's got all of that juicy stuff that's going to support the developing embryo upon fertilization. And then what happens is this big structure, this big bubble that's developing around this thing, this is called the follicle, and the follicle will actually, this big bubble, it actually sort of extends from the side of the ovary. I'll show you a picture in just a second. And then when the woman is ready to ovulate, this thing actually has to bust through the wall of the ovary. And meaning it has to bust through the tunica albuginea and the germinal epithelium. When this occurs, sometimes women have a little bit of spotting. Sometimes there's a little bleeding associated with it. And some women can feel it when that occurs. Here is a picture that was done with laparoscopy that shows you. So this is the ovary. This right here is the follicle, right? the structure that you see right here. And then this is the ovulating oocyte, which is both really weird and really cool. Okay, so, and then we did the ovarian medulla. Okay, so now let's just make sure that we can find all of the structures that are really supporting. Okay, so, and by the way, the ligaments are hard for everybody. The way that I remember them best is to remember what they attach to what. So, the broad ligament supports both the uterus and the ovaries. Remember, this is a posterior view, so the broad ligament would kind of be in front if you were looking anterior. And I think you can see, yeah, you can see the broad ligament here, and then the ovaries are behind it. Okay, so that's the broad ligament. It's easy to find because it's broad, right? And then the suspensory ligament, this one looks weird, but what this is actually doing is this is suspending the ovaries from the body wall. It's sort of going right down here, and it's attaching to the ovaries. That is called the suspensory ligament. And the ovarian artery and vein, the gonadals, will run through that ligament. And then the last one is the ovarian ligament, which is this guy right here, which isn't a tube. People want it to be a tube, but it's not a tube. It attaches the ovary to the uterus. Okay, let's see if it's on this picture. No, I don't see it there. Okay, so that's those three. All right, and then we already did the ovarian medulla. All right, so just a little clinical connection related to the ovaries. Ovarian cancer is an interesting little beast. It's the fourth leading cause of cancer-related deaths in women. It's not as common as breast cancer or cervical cancer, but because it occurs in this germinal epithelium right here that would be in contact with the serous membrane, a lot of times when it occurs, it just forms this discomfort in a woman that could be misdiagnosed as either stomach ache or uterine cramps or just reproductive discomfort. And because remember, the serous membrane is really shared with the whole abdominopelvic cavity, because the symptoms are so variable and so easily attributed to other things, a lot of times it doesn't get diagnosed until much later than other cancers. So it's got a higher mortality rate because the symptoms are often misdiagnosed until a late stage. Now, the only reason I'm telling you that is not so that you can think, oh, these doctors don't know what they're doing. But if you have a family history of breast or ovarian cancer, there are certain types of breast and ovarian cancers that increase in likelihood with a familial predisposition. So that's the kind of thing that you should know and your physician should know. Okay, so that's it for ovaries.